residents across every category. And so we try to promote that in a wide variety of ways. So that is the Eden Prairie Human Rights and Diversity Commission. We're made up of a wide breadth of citizens here in Eden Prairie who love this city, who care about this city, and really are working hard to make Eden Prairie a place that works well for everyone.
So another bit of fun. I always like to start out by finding out if anyone's ever attended a commission event, or if they haven't, maybe didn't know it. And so I like to start off asking, I know some of our attendees are virtual and some are here in person, but I'm interested here, does anyone know of an event or a program that the HRDC either hosts or partners on?
We have no prize to give you.
No, yeah, I don't have any. I won't throw candy at you, I promise.
For those of you who are watching at home, you can text in your questions, in your comments, and your answers to this one HRDC event perhaps you participated in, 612-562-6796. I believe it will be also on your screen as well as you watch. 612-562-6796.
And if you don't, that's okay. Like I said, you probably have, or you probably do know, and you may not have known that we were there. A lot of what we do is in partnership. We very rarely act alone on initiatives. A lot of our work is community-driven, and so we're often partners of organizations that are doing great work. But luckily, we have an expert here in Greg that he can walk us through some of the different things we've done.
So on the screen, you see a wide variety of photos from some of those events, and even a flyer or two. And just to highlight a few of those pieces, a few years ago, probably 3 or 4 years ago now, we reached out to our deputy police chief, who's now the chief of police here in Eden Prairie, Chief Greg Weber, and reached out to, at the time, Deputy Chief Weber and just said, you know what, we'd love to stay in better communication with you, with the police department, as a commission, and we'd love to plan something together. We would love to work together to reach out into the community, especially our communities of color, and help in building trust and relationship. And so now Chief Weber has just been a fantastic partner, and the entire police department. And so one of the flyers you see up there is Coffee with the Cops. So we hosted an event about 3 or 4 years ago where we invited community members to come and have roundtable discussions with members of the Eden Prairie Police Department, HRDC leaders. We've had various listening sessions with the City Council as well. And then after Coffee with the Cops, we decided to focus on a youth-oriented event a couple of years ago. And so after a lot of name possibilities, we centered on the title Kicking It With the Cops. And it was youth-oriented. It was at one of the local parks. And we had members of the police department, fire department there, city council, the mayor was there, city manager, everybody, and several hundred kids from around the neighborhood. Many of our Somali American children were there playing basketball and soccer. And the one thing I said we have to have is we have to have a dunk tank. We have to have a dunk tank. So I was able to strong arm a couple of our city council members, our mayor, Ron was in the dunk tank, a number of people, and it was just a wonderful time of fun, building trust and community with some of our communities of color a couple years ago. And so last year with COVID, we weren't able to do this. We had it on the docket again, but we'll continue once things normalize a little bit more. Each year we also present a series of human rights awards, the Eden Prairie Human Rights Award, across 4 categories, individual, youth, nonprofit, and then the business category. And so we elicit nominations from the community, and as a commission, we decide on those and then present those at a city council meeting each year for excellent work in the space of human rights in Eden Prairie. One of the things that I'm just so thrilled and proud of as a commission is the People Fest celebration. It's something we started a few years ago. It was It was kind of a dream in the mind of former chair of the HRDC and now present City Council member PG Naranian and myself and some other people. Just an opportunity to celebrate the many cultures here in Eden Prairie, to get together and to share food and music and performance, and to educate Greater Eden Prairie about all the cultures that are represented here among us. And Megan has done just a phenomenal job, along with so many other city staff members. So this is a partnership week-long celebration of cultures culminating in the People Fest party. A couple years ago, pre-COVID, we had rendition number 2. Maybe you were at that. But it's a partnership with the Eden Prairie Community Foundation, Eden Prairie Schools, many city departments, Parks and Rec, the Art Center, and so on. And then we also, as Megan mentioned, partner with so many other organizations across the city. For many years, we've partnered with Grace Church. They have a Stop the Trafficking 5K run. Maybe some of you have participated. And this event is something that many other partners are part of as well. But we host a lot of cultural learning events and opportunities, and again, are always looking for ways to partner with community organizations.
One more that I want to highlight, you'll see at the top of your screen, there's a young girl and a picture next to it. With COVID this year, it's been hard. We've had to put a lot of our events on pause because of all of the different precautions that we need to take. And so this year, but we felt it was important to still offer the community a venue for conversation. And so particularly with our young people, it's been a time where our young people have really felt the desire to communicate and to share, and particularly to speak their truth to those in authority. And speak truth to power is something that we've seen a lot of our young people do over this past year, and sharing their experiences. And so what we did for Martin Luther King Day this year was we offered an essay and art contest where we asked young people to submit a piece of original work that picked a quote from Martin Luther King, and then they put together a piece of work that demonstrated what that quote means to them, and how it's still relevant today, how our community can carry that legacy forward. And so what you see up there is a young resident. Her name is Shania. She came in front of City Council and she shared the piece of work that she had created. We had 4 winners from the contest that came forward to City Council and either read written pieces or described artwork. And I know the opportunity to come speak in front of positions of authority is just so important for our young people to get comfortable with having difficult conversations and sharing their perspectives, and for us as adults to hear those things. And so I didn't expect to be so moved by the information that these 4 came and shared, and the stories that they told council. And I know council was expecting to welcome them and hear their work, but I think they were impacted more than they expected as well. So that was a silver lining that came from COVID, that we weren't able to do a lot of our traditional things, but found new ways to host these discussions. I also wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about one of our current initiatives that's really showcased kind of the process that HRD follows. So one of the areas that our commissioners identified a few years ago that we haven't paid as much attention to in the past is the history of the land that Eden Prairie is built on, the heritage of the Native American communities that have lived here in the past and still live here today, and what that means for Eden Prairie as a city that's built upon Indigenous land. And so there are a few commissioners that decided that that was an area that they wanted to spend more time focusing on. In our first year on that project, there was an archaeological dig that happened right along Flying Cloud Drive. During that road construction project, the county did an archaeological dig there and actually recovered a good number of artifacts from that area that were then processed and cataloged. And so our first year we did a social media campaign. There's a website where there's different videos and stories about the artifacts that were found here. It's really fascinating information. And from there, they were happy with how that turned out, but they didn't feel like they were done yet. And so they decided that what they wanted to take a look at was a land acknowledgement statement. And what a land acknowledgement statement is it's basically a statement that an organization or an individual give at the beginning of a meeting or a gathering to recognize the history of the land that they're on, the significance of that, the importance of that land. And so they began working on that. In conjunction with our People Fest, we had a kickoff event with Native Pride dancers. You see an Instagram post there of Sana and Leslie, two of our commissioners, with one of the dancers that was there that evening at Starring Lake. And so Leslie opened the event with our land acknowledgement statement. We worked in conjunction with Native Pride dancers to put that statement together. Leslie opened up that event with it. And we also put a guide together as well that's available on the city's website. We wanted to make statements that were relevant to anyone here in Eden Prairie. So that guide is available publicly to any organization, company, group of residents that would like to use a land acknowledgement statement and know that, that they're using one that's appropriate here for Eden Prairie. And so there's a guide online that has 3 different sample statements that have all been worked in conjunction with Native Pride Arts. And vetted and are appropriate for use, and so that guide is meant to either be a final product or a starting point, depending on which group would like to use it. And so we always encourage people to take a look at that, and if that's something that they aren't familiar with, to learn about. Well, City Council knew that we were doing this, and so they decided in November that they wanted to take it for a spin. And so in November, they opened up one of their City Council meetings. They put the land acknowledgement statement into a proclamation and opened one of our City Council meetings with it as well. We didn't realize we were part of a trend, but it is apparently a trend that municipalities are beginning to look at land acknowledgement statements. Typically, you'd see it in either higher education or Canada or Australia are 2 countries that have done a lot of work in this area. And so we have been getting media requests. You'll see an article there that State Line, which is part of the Pew Charitable Trust, reached out because they did an article about Arizona and Minnesota and a few other places that have done statements to kind of talk about that trend as well. So the land acknowledgement statement and the work that those 3 commissioners have done, I think really showcases not only how they work in conjunction with community, but also bring education and awareness to our council and share beyond our community, as well as provide resources for community members.
Pastor Peter, we have a question here from one of our listeners. Do you know why the city council or whoever decided to rate the city as not racist?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question, Pastor?
Do you know why the city council or whoever decided to rate the city as not racist?
Sure. So that was a comment that was made in conjunction with our race equity initiative, and that we'll talk about that process a little bit later in the presentation. And so if it's okay, I'd like to leave that question because there is a lot of context that comes behind that statement that I'd like to be able to share kind of as part of the presentation.
Do you know why the city council or whoever decided to rate the city as not racist?
I wouldn't be able to speak for the reason why they made that decision. That would be an opinion of a council member, a question that would need to be asked directly to him.
I think we'll be looking at that as we get a little bit further on in our evening's agenda here. We'll be talking some about the fall and that initiative here in 2021. So stay tuned. We'll keep an eye on that question though moving forward.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
So that brings us to our first discussion period. I know Greg wanted to give everyone a chance to process a bit and to share a little bit about kind of his personal motivation on the commission, but we also wanted to open it up for questions at this time.
Yeah, so again, I signed up to join the commission about 5-6 years ago, and one of the things that motivated me to get involved was actually my faith. So I'm a follower of Jesus, and often we point to the cross as a guide for our faith. That there's a vertical axis and a horizontal axis, and right relationship with the individual and God is part of the Christian faith, but right relationship neighbor to neighbor is part of our faith as well. And so there is personally being made right with God and an individual aspect, and there's a social aspect as well. So both the sin and the working toward justice and peace and love has this vertical and horizontal dimension. So for me as a Christian, I wanted to get involved and serve my city in an area of personal passion for me. So I had a sense of calling toward working for the common good in my city. So that started out with very, very similar actions as you all are taking, listening and learning about my city, about what is being done, what needs to be done, and finding my place, how I can help. And no effective action is ever done in isolation. And so one of the great privileges for me has been to link arms with some wonderful, wonderful people who live here in Eden Prairie, who love their city, across faith traditions, across backgrounds, across races and ethnicities, across ages as well. As I mentioned, we have a wonderful youth program. And then to connect with wonderful people who work full-time for the city, like Megan, to work with the mayor and Rick Getchell, our city manager, and many, many others, to really lean into this work, to really try to follow through on the promise that Eden Prairie is a place where we all can flourish, where everybody can find welcome and an opportunity to grow, to raise their family well. To what is the city tagline? Eden Prairie, live, work, dream, something like that. Yeah, and just making sure that is true for all of us. And so it's work that's never done, but I do see that we're making an impact. And one of the questions that Pastor Peter provided to us early on was, what are some key success stories that you could point to? How do you know that you are making an impact in this work? And so I jotted a few things down. I would say one of the key pieces that I've noticed is an increased level of support from the mayor's office and the city council, and in fact, the entire city staff. This is not difficult work for us to really move the needle. We'll talk more about this in a little bit, but the Race Equity Initiative, this larger initiative that we're undertaking, the City Council invested some money in making this happen. They've invested city resources and time into investigating where we're not doing as well, where we have opportunities to improve as a place for our communities of color to really thrive. I'd say another real encouraging sign over the past number of years is the increased engagement from our city offices. So I mentioned earlier the partnerships with the police department, the fire department, Parks and Recreation, and many, many others. And I want to give a lot of credit to Megan as our staff liaison. She joined us about 4 years ago. And, it felt like at the time, during my early part on the HRDC, we were operating in a bit of a silo, wondering, are there others who care about this work as much as we do? We're sure that they're out there, but who are they? Where are they? To the city offices, they've got their plans, they've got their Parks and Rec schedule for the summer and the concerts and all this. Where does this piece fit in? Where does diversity and equity and inclusion fit in? And I've seen real commitment and engagement and investment over the past 4 years, especially for Parks and Rec to say, you know what, we need to take a look at the events that we're throwing as part of our regular calendar. Do they represent the diversity here in Eden Prairie, or do they appeal to a certain demographic, kind of a traditional demographic? Megan will get into the numbers a little bit later, but around 25% of our community are communities of color, folks from communities of color, non-white. And so we're a bit of an outlier even here in the southwest suburbs. Do the services we're offering, everything that we're doing, are they reflective of our community? And I feel like the needle is moving in those areas.
Greg, I'm wondering, just to follow up on that, have you noticed any difference or change since last May, since the death of George Floyd at all? Or has that shifted your community engagement in any way?
It's a great question, Pastor. It's complicated by the fact that you layer on COVID and the pandemic, and it really has handicapped our ability to be face-to-face and host some of these events and engage. But I would say it's only increased our commitment, I think the city's commitment, and so I'm confident that will continue. And again, as we talk a little bit more about the Race Equity Initiative, we can unpackage that a little bit as well. So, yeah, it's a good question.
I would answer yes on that as well. Did I use my mic? That's okay. The echo was suddenly gone. It was nice for a moment, but for only me, I think. So the Race Equity Initiative actually was a direct result of the civil unrest here in Minneapolis and the death of George Floyd. City council meetings are all archived. You can go back and watch. But over the summer, when this project was really introduced, and we'll talk more again in depth about it later, but Mayor Case really spoke quite eloquently during that meeting about this being a motivation to look internally and think, we are not Minneapolis, but could we be Minneapolis? And what's happening here in Eden Prairie now? What can we reflect upon? What can we celebrate that we're doing well? And where could we continue to grow without needing a tragedy to motivate it here in Eden Prairie? And kind of using that moment of clarity to take a look and reflect here in Eden Prairie and rate ourselves a bit. And that is where the Race Equity Initiative was launched from. I think the other sort of light bulb moment for us was how much work we're already doing compared to neighboring suburbs. I can't tell you how many cities I've heard from in the last 12 months that want to start commissions or want to learn how we manage to get students on our commission, or hearing from other commissioners who don't have the support of their city council and the initiatives, fears of politics interfering with the commission's work and whatnot. And so it was reassuring to hear how we're doing compared to some of our neighbor suburbs, and our opportunity to really build partnership with neighboring cities in this moment as well, where we've been able to, Chaska is looking at a certain initiative that we've done in the past and being able to share that information, speaking with Northfield about their own land acknowledgement statement, up in Brooklyn Park Center, I think Brooklyn Park, I can't ever keep the two straight, about the work that they're doing, taking a look at their police department, similar to our race equity. And so the opportunity for partnership across the Twin Cities has really flourished as well.
Well, shall we move into the next part of the presentation about Eden Prairie, the demographics? Is that, sure. I'm looking at our time at 7 o'clock, so.
I'm always too optimistic about how much time I'm gonna take. I think it's because my grandma really told me that I talk too quickly. A second question, and if you've met Rick Getchow, you've heard him talk about this. I think he uses it in his introduction tagline. But anyone here in the audience, can you guess what % of residents report that the overall quality of life in Eden Prairie is good or excellent, according to our last community survey? It's under 100, I'll tell you that. Any guesses? 80?
80.
90. I was like, 54, man, we gotta step it up. What else? All right. It is 95% that rates Eden Prairie as good or excellent overall quality of life. So every 2 years we do a survey of our community to get ratings on all of our different city services, on our amenities, on our economy and our services and all of these different things. In Eden Prairie, really, you can see something we're really proud of is that this community has a really high quality of life according to our community members. Money Magazine rates it as one of the best places to live nationwide since 2006. Again, I stole most of these right from Rick's PowerPoints because he does love to talk about it, as he should. It's an honor. I think this year we won another award for Best Place to Work nationwide as well. And so a little bit about the history of Eden Prairie. The text is small, we'll walk through it. The pictures are really what's important here. But I wanted to talk through kind of what Eden Prairie's looked like in the past and what they look like now. I grew up in St. Louis Park, and so I've been here, not in Eden Prairie, but near enough to see you my entire life. And now I work here. But back, I'm gonna bring up my own, because even with my glasses, I can't read that. But if you look at the beginning of the chart there, this is from a community profile that was put together by Met Council based on census data. So back in 1970, we had just under 7,000 people that lived here, and they made up approximately 1,600 households. So if you think about what the streets and neighborhoods look like now, that certainly was a different time. I know my dad still tells me stories of biking through the fields of Eden Prairie back in the 70s and 80s. But if you look at today, we're at about 64,000 people. So certainly we've experienced dramatic growth, dramatic development. In our community, you can see that through the different neighborhoods that have come up. Eden Prairie is nearly fully developed at this point. There are some infilled lots, but we are different from a lot of our neighboring communities in that most of our land is, that is developable is already developed. There's another excerpt there too, that's from the city's Aspire plan, which is the comprehensive plan for 2040. That's the roadmap for where Eden Prairie wants to go between now and 2040. And it talks a bit about how the city is growing. But it's growing a little bit more slowly than the rest of the county at this point. So they projected that we would be up to 67,000 by 2021, and you can see the purple projections there are where they anticipate us going. And so some of the work right now of the city is try to figure out what we're going to do with all these people. Where will they live? Make sure that we have the transit and the amenities to serve all of them. And so that's a lot of the work that's done in our department as well. We also know that our community looks different. That pie on the left, that green circle with that little sliver of other colors mixed together, that's what Eden Prairie looked like in 1990, so not too long ago, 30 years ago. And in 30 years ago, we were 95.9% white. That certainly is not true today when you look at the chart on the right there. As Greg gave away earlier.
So sorry. I knew as soon as I was saying it, I was stealing some of your thunder.
That's all right. We are approximately 72% white now, so that has changed dramatically. You'll see some of our largest community groups are from both the Asian and the African communities. We have a large Indian population from India. We also have a large Asian population from other parts of Asia. Certainly we have a large Somali population, but we also have a lot of other East and West African families here as well. It's getting to the point now, again, as things have changed, that little sliver became bigger. Not all of those are recent immigrants. Certainly we have a lot of folks that have directly immigrated to Eden Prairie from other countries, but we also have a lot of second and third generation immigrants. And so I know a common misconception in our community is that when you see residents that may be of Somali or Indian descent, assuming that they are first generation immigrants, when in fact many of them have lived here longer than Greg has. I know one of our commissioners, Assad, I think he told me that he was the second Somali American to move to Eden Prairie, I think is what he told me. And that he came directly from Somalia, but all of his children who are now grown were raised here as well. And so that's one tidbit that I've really learned as I've gotten to know the community, is to really be aware of the fact that a lot of our families here are immigrants, but not necessarily new immigrants. I wanted to talk a little bit too about what different cohorts look like here in Eden Prairie. I know when you hear us talking in the community development department, when I'm wearing my kind of housing and planning hat, we talk a lot about building housing and supporting our aging residents. Eden Prairie is aging more quickly than it is younging, so our average age is rising right now. And there's a lot of conversation about how we'll be able to maintain life cycle again, housing and amenities and transportation for our residents as they get older, single level living, assisted public transportation, different things that are really important to our older residents. And so that's a large focus at the city, but also if you look at that teeny tiny circle there, that yellow half, those are our white students, and the other half is our non-white students in our public school system. So again, as you can see, Eden Prairie continues to diversify, particularly when you look at our young people. Mm-hmm. And that's another sort of a two-sided issue that we've seen again in housing development. We're also seeing that a lot of our families are growing in family size. So where in the past Eden Prairie development, you would be thinking about families of 2 to 4 people. And so when you're building multifamily apartment buildings or condos, townhomes, single-family homes, you're thinking of accommodating a family with 2, maybe 3 children. But now we have a growing number of families that have 4, 5, 6, 7 children. And how are we going to provide housing for those families as well? Another trivia question, and Pastor Peter, I might put you on the hot seat here to see if you know this one. Can you guess what percentage of our residents were born outside of the United States?
I'll say 15.
You cheated.
I cheated.
He saw the slides ahead of time.
It's not even on the slide, so I don't know how you did it, but you nailed it. You saw the question, it is 14.8.
14.8.
Yeah,
wow.
according to the census, it is 14.8% of our residents that were born outside of the United States. Maybe you came to one of our events and had it on the spin wheel, and
somewhere
it's just sunk into your brain.
Somewhere in the recesses of my mind, yeah.
So again, as we're talking about the changing demographics of Eden Prairie, we wanted to pause here and ask the audience, if both here and virtually, if you have any questions about this data or the stories that come along with it.
What are some of the services that you do offer that attract the diverse population?
That attracts them to come live here, or that they enjoy once they're here?
That attracts them here, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Strong schools, I think, is always a motivator, particularly for families with children, that the school district has a proven reputation of being a strong district. I think that's really important to a lot of families. We hear a lot about the opportunity of Eden Prairie, that a lot of families are willing to really to find a way to make it work to live here in Eden Prairie because they know it is such a great place to raise children. Particularly with some of our communities of color, I think it's familiarity. They know people who have lived here, and that word of mouth is really important, that they've chosen to come here as well. I know Molly, my previous supervisor, told me a story once of an envoy that came actually from Africa, from one of the refugee camps in Africa, because they had heard about this place, Eden Prairie, and how wonderful it had been for their community members, because many of our residents have come from there either recently or in the past, and so they came to see this place, this Eden Prairie that they had heard about all the way back, I believe they either from Kenya or Ethiopia. And so I think that's a lot of it, as well as our strong reputation of being just a good place to live.
So outside of Minneapolis, does Eden Prairie have one of the larger populations of Somali Americans?
We do. Yeah, Minneapolis is number 1, St. Paul number 2, Eden Prairie is number 3. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so the strong schools, as Megan mentioned, you can see in the demographics growing incredibly, and also the business environment. You know, Eden Prairie is actually not a bedroom community, which we actually have about the same number of people, daytime residents as nighttime residents, right? So people traveling out for work is people traveling in. And I think the light rail will be a wonderful boon in that direction as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but I'll make a plug for, again, Megan and the work that she and her team do in community services. Once folks move to Eden Prairie, there are lots of supports for them and programs that they can access, and she serves as kind of a key point person from a city perspective in that. So it's a place that draws, I think, folks of color, but also supports in many ways quite well. Yeah, other questions? All right, should we keep moving?
Let's move on.
Good, I've got plenty to say. So next I wanted to look a little bit more closely. So I told you at the beginning, 95% of our residents rate this as a good or excellent place to live. And we've talked about some of the really positive things here, but what I didn't tell you, data can be tricky sometimes. Who is telling us? We didn't survey every single resident. I would assume that not every single one of you answered that survey. So that information is only as good as the people that we're hearing it from, and from the types of experiences that those people have had here in Eden Prairie. And so another consequence of George Floyd's death here in Minnesota was that last summer, our civic engagement platform, the company that the city uses to do surveys with our resident, put out a template survey for all communities and all of their clients to use, talking about equity and inclusion. And so we went ahead and used that in our community here in June 2020. And certainly that was a time where people were very civically engaged last June and really wanted to share their feedback with local government and with one another. And I was talking with one of our communication staff, and she said, I had to double check. I've never seen so many people take a survey because they had gotten such an overwhelming overwhelming response for it. We had over 800 respondents, which is pretty good for a city survey. So particularly in a time where everybody's attentions are pulled in so many different directions. And so one of the questions that it asked, and this survey is available online, you can go see it in depth. We'd be here all night if I told you about all of the things that I had learned from it. But one of the questions that we asked is, how do you rate the Eden Prairie community on each of the following? And one of those was making residents feel welcome. So you can see we're doing pretty well. 42% rated us excellent, 40% rated us as good, 14% at fair, and 4% at poor. So you look at it and you think, hey, we're doing all right. But then you take a look at what's next. Who answered that question? And 80% of our respondents were white. And so we can say pretty definitively that our white residents are having a good experience here in Eden Prairie. But when we're talking about equity and inclusion, that's not the question that we're looking to get an answer from. And so what we did was we asked our data company to be able to give us a little bit more thorough of a breakdown. And this is where I have to apologize because the screen always looks different on my laptop than it does projected into the room. But the small graph that you'll see on the right, it's color-coded, so that helps. But The small graph you'll see on the right is the cumulative of all the respondents mixed together. But then if you look a little bit more closely at the demographic breakdowns by race, you can see that that graph doesn't match. So the first column that we have there is American Indian or Alaskan. The second is Arabic or Middle Eastern. The third would be Asian, Asian Indian or Pacific Islander. Then we have Black or African American, Spanish, Hispanic, and Latino. We have white, and then we have our other category. And folks could self-identify into more than one category, so there's not a one-to-one ratio of how that works. Certainly people have more than one ethnicity or racial background that they identify with. And so you can see some of our groups, we didn't have a lot of respondents. So American Indian, Arabic, Middle Eastern, we had smaller data pools to work with there because we had less respondents from those cultural groups. But our Asian, our Black, and our Spanish, Hispanic or Latino group was a bit more significant in numbers there. So you can see that for the most part, there are some differences. And so that's one of those instances where the city is really learning. We can ask the question, but we also need to pay attention to who's answering it. When we talk about what our measures of success are, when we talk about our data points and our data gathering, that we need to really keep a close eye on whose voices we're hearing and who we may not be hearing from. And so while this is a good starting point for us and is a good quantifiable amount of data from our community, it doesn't tell a complete picture. And again, this is one of the data sets that we'll be rolling into our Race Equity Project, our initiative there. It's one source of information. We also wanted to look at I wanted to share one other additional question with you as well. And in that survey, it got more specific, and so it would ask, one of the questions was, how welcome, if at all, do you think Eden Prairie is for people who are Asian, Asian Indian, or Pacific Islander? And on the left, you'll see how our white respondents rated the experience of our Asian, Asian Indian, or Pacific Islander neighbors. And on the right, you will see how Asian, Asian Indian, and Pacific Islanders rated their own experience. And I'll walk through a couple of the different cultural groups here that responded to the survey, but these data points were really important to me because we are 75% white. That does make up the majority of our community. Does our white community have an accurate understanding of what the experience of communities of color are having here in Eden Prairie? And that's something that Mayor Case said during the beginning of the Race Equity Initiative that it has really stuck with me, is that he understands what Eden Prairie looks like from his own lived experience as a white man navigating with he has positional authority, he has all kinds of different privilege here in Eden Prairie that makes his experience different than that of some of the community members. But yet, we need to represent all of our community members. In order to do that, we need to understand where our blind spots may be. And so that's some of the work that we're doing with the Race Equity Initiative, and that's some of the learning we did through this survey. So you'll see, particularly looking at our Asian communities, 61% of white folks rated that we do an excellent job of welcoming folks from Asian communities, while only 53% of Asian respondents agreed. You'll see the biggest difference would be there between 8% of white folks rated us as fair, while 23% of Asian Americans. And so taking a look next at the Hispanic respondents, so on the left side you'll see that 53% of our white respondents think that Eden Prairie is very welcoming. For Hispanic residents, while only 39% of Hispanic participants agree with that statement. And so again, data is important, but so is the impression that you take from it. And so if you take one takeaway from these things, it would be that that we have more learning to do, that our white respondents weren't able to accurately identify the experience from our community of color. And it's most pronounced here in our Black or African American community, that 9% of white respondents responded that Eden Prairie is not welcoming for our Black and African American communities, while 29% of Black or African Americans rated the same. So let's talk some more.
Well, thank you for that breakdown,
Yeah.
too. I really appreciate the fact that there's the overall study from 2018 that of all the respondents, but then being able to break it down to hear from our neighbors that are of different ethnic backgrounds, that their response to the community isn't quite the same, perhaps as what we might perceive it to be. I found that to be most illuminating when I was doing some research a few weeks ago in preparation for our evening here together. All these studies are online. And I guess my follow-up question would be, in what way does this make a difference then for you and your work within the Human Rights and Diversity Commission? Where do you lean into we don't know who those respondents are, but we can just presume they're members of our community. And so what does that mean for your work? How does it flavor what you do?
Well, I'll speak a little bit to the city structure. I mean, it certainly impacts the commission as well, but I think that's something the commission has always really known. We have a diverse group of commissioners, not only in race, but in other sort of intersectional life experiences. And so I don't think that was surprising to anybody on the commission, and certainly that's how we've always kind of operated, is looking into the gaps and the shadows and finding out what we're missing. But I have seen a pretty dramatic shift in the city in the last few years, and what they use as their metrics of success. So I've heard it from our Park and Rec department, from our police department, from other areas of, we know we provide quality programming, but we don't know is who are we missing and why are they missing? And so there's been a bit of a shift from just looking at the number, like, oh, we had 3,000 people come to this event, that's fantastic, which it is. We want to provide quality services to a large volume of residents, but also making sure that we're looking at who is participating, and for those that are not, designing programs that are of interest to them, and ensuring that residents, this all ties together into the Race Equity Initiative, which is why it's last, but part of it there too is feeling like not only am I included, but this program is designed for me or by me, or with considerations that are important to me, and not designed because we're like, oh, we need to check this box here. And I think that's been a really big shift in a lot of our departments, but particularly we've seen it in both our emergency response departments and also in our Park and Rec.
Any questions, Pastor Gail, from home?
Nope.
Okay.
I think let's move on into the next section then. I feel like we're saving the best for last, right? We keep talking about this Race Equity Initiative. So we can go to the next slide here. So this emerged after the death of George Floyd, after the killing of George Floyd, nearly a year ago now. And I know we're in the throes of the Derek Chauvin murder trial right now that we're all paying attention to. But right after this happened, I like all of us, was mourning the tragedy, mourning the senseless loss, and also asking, what can I do? What can we do? What should we do? And specifically, what can we do here in Eden Prairie? What can I do in my neighborhood? And this is after, a number of years on the HRDC doing, I think, a lot of good work with a lot of good people. And again, as Megan mentioned, having such support from the mayor's office, the city council, all these city offices. We're not fighting the battles that some other municipalities are in this space, at least at these levels. But I just felt we need to do something. We need to go a little bit deeper. So I texted Ron, Mayor Case, and said, hey, what's next? We got to do something. You and I need to talk. And he texted back and he said, absolutely. I've been thinking a lot about this. We're gonna do something. And so at the next city council meeting, he basically gave a call to arms, and he commissioned the Human Rights and Diversity Commission to dig a little bit deeper, and shared his deep concern for what had happened, and really laid out a call to action. So acknowledging the work that already has been ongoing, but recognizing that we needed to go a little bit deeper. And he said, I don't know exactly what this looks like, but HRDC, Megan, go for it. And so we connected with Rick Getcho, our city manager, and others, and began to frame out what this could look like, what learning more, going deeper, moving forward in action could look like. And the Human Rights and Diversity Commission interacted with kind of a framework that was put together, gave really good input, and then presented a proposal, the Race Equity Initiative, to the City Council for approval. And so they gave their blessing and then provided additional funding to connect us with an advisor, a consultant who operates in this space, works with corporations, municipalities in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space in the investigation and in the learning project that we wanted to undertake. And so the statement here really encapsulates the focus of the initiative, and I will read it, especially for those at home. It says, the City of Eden Prairie would like to find ways for the city to become more responsive to the residents' diverse needs and to advance racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. We will be actively engaging with the community to learn about our members' needs. We will also complete a review of current policies and procedures to identify barriers. As a result, we hope this project will create and strengthen community relationships, encourage shared decision-making, and minimize disparities wherever possible. So on the next slide, we took a look at really 6 different areas of the city emerged as areas of inquiry, as we called them. And Megan did an excellent job of helping frame this up in some of the initial and then final documents. One of the things that we knew we wanted to do was to look beyond the police department. So a lot of places, a lot of cities across the country, that's kind of the focus. When you talk about how are communities of color being served, where are there racial inequities, it's we need to investigate or take action in the police department space. And we wanted to take a look at that, but we wanted to take a look at really the entire community. And so number 1 is emergency response, which would include our police and fire department, EMT. The second area, facility, program, accessibility, and culture. So we kind of pointed to this a little bit earlier. Eden Prairie is a draw to so many for its wonderful facilities and programs, but are they serving all of our communities? And especially those in our communities of color, what do they have to say? What do they have to tell us in these areas? So each one of these areas of inquiry implies a series of listening actions that we're taking. Recruiting, hiring, and retention. So especially in our city staff, those who are employed full-time in the city. You know, Megan mentioned we show up all the time on the Star Tribune's best places to work, you know, in the state and on some of these national lists. But is our city staff members, our police department in every area, are they reflective of that 25 to 28% individuals of color here in the community that call Eden Prairie home? Fourth, connection to community. You know, do you feel a sense of welcome, a sense of belonging, a sense of really home, that this is your home? 5, community experience, connected to something that we have a little bit less control over, but do you feel connected to your neighbors? Do you feel really at home with, you know, not just city services, but with your neighbors, those you live next to? And then 6, we felt like we needed to look forward to the future. And focus on developing future leaders. So what programs currently are available to students, especially young people of color, to sharpen their leadership skills, to learn more about the city, to learn more about opportunities to grow and engage? I think one of the success indicators for me 10, 15 years on of this race equity initiative and all this good work that's happening here at St. Andrew, other communities, is how diverse is our city council, our city employees, our police department? Is there congruence between folks who call Eden Prairie home and the leadership of the city, those who are working to make Eden Prairie a better place at all levels? So the next slide, this is a project that we wanted to start and finish overnight. I mean, right after the George Floyd's death, the tragedy. You know, we thought, hey, we need to listen quickly, we need to take action right now. But we really realized that we needed to take time to design this project well and to listen well to our community. We didn't want to just assume on the experiences of our communities of color. We wanted to listen well. And so this is where our consultant group has been very pivotal in helping us kind of map this project out. They've undertaken a lot of the work, Megan so much of the work. But we are right now, February 2021. It's no longer February. We're into April, but we're still in the kind of February to April slot. where we're reviewing the literature on best practices, what are other cities doing in these spaces we can learn from, and engaging in deep listening to our communities. And so we're having listening sessions, a few listening sessions with folks from our communities of color around all these areas of inquiry. Some of the pieces that have been done, the internal scans, the document review, interviews of city staff, city leaders across the board, and then moving into this next month, data analysis and review of findings. So what have we found? What are the data telling us? In the listening sessions, in the surveys, all of this. And then our goal is to, in July, report the findings to the mayor and the city council. Here are the results of the Race Equity Initiative. Here's what we've heard. And here are the recommendations that come based on that. After that report is given, is interacted with, the city will decide on some of those key initiatives and determine next steps. I imagine some of that work will come back to the HRDC, to Megan, but this is really a citywide initiative and citywide commitment. As to what those findings are, as to what those next steps will be, we'll have to wait till July to see, but I'm very, very encouraged about the structure of the initiative and again, the commitment on the part of the city to really lean into this and act on the findings as a result.
And I want to move backwards just a little bit on the timeline. I know we're pushing the end, but I promised an online viewer a little bit more context on the question they had about the statement that was made by one of our council members that Eden Prairie is not racist, I believe is what was said. As I said, as for the motives or the reasons or the belief that that council member holds, that would be theirs to speak to. I wouldn't feel right making inferences about what they were referring to in that case. But what I can tell you about is the process, what this looked like at City Council. So as Greg said, the project started with a really broad mandate and a vote by council to authorize this project. And that was unanimous support for the project. There was some debate about how wide, how deep, what does this look like? It was a really sort of vague mandate of like, let's just take an inventory of what we're doing and where we're doing well and where we can make changes. And so the commission went ahead and fleshed out what that meant for us and what we saw as priorities through the different items that Greg has covered. And then we took a look at it and went, wow, that's a lot. And we are not qualified to do this at a city level here as a group of volunteers, that we really need experts to come alongside us on this and make sure that we're giving the project the justice that it deserves and to really the energy that it requires and the expertise that we need. And so then we reapproached City Council and we said, we're going to need a consultant to come alongside us on this. If you want us to do it well and you want us to do it in a way that is really beneficial for the city, we need some additional support. And so that's when it went back to council in November. They authorized us to look for a consultant. We interviewed a number of agencies. As city budgets flow, I'm not sure how familiar all of you are with municipal budgets. They're pretty static. And this was an unexpected expense that the city had. And so they had to take a look at how we would fund this project and where that would come from. And some of the debate that was seen in the fall on City Council was the discussion of cost and what our budget would look like for this project, because it wasn't something that we had in our 5, 10, 20-year plan as cities often do. And so part of that discussion was around the budget and what City Council thought was appropriate. And so they reviewed the proposal by the consultant that staff had selected. And then they asked for an additional a few weeks to consider the proposal and review the data more closely. And then that second meeting, they came back and authorized the consultant. And I believe we started work the next day. And here we are, and we've been in contact with City Council. Council has changed a bit. Lisa Toomey has joined Council now. Brett Aho graduated off Council. So the makeup has changed a bit in the last few months, but we'll continue to move forward with the project and keeping them in the loop. We have a checkpoint coming up, and then we'll, of course, bring our report of findings back this summer, which really is more of a beginning date than an end, because implementation is what's going to matter there. I see that we're over time, and I apologize. I know that's important. But I wanted to show you to the list of who's participating in this. It's not just a commission project, so our whole city council is involved, our consultant team, myself as the staff liaison, and our HR manager has been really instrumental in some of the internal coordination with city staff. For the internal participation, we had documents that poured in from all of our departments. We also had individual interviews, dual interviews or focus groups with key staff members, so folks that had expertise either in their area or in their lived experience as well. And then city leadership also participated. And then our external participation at this point, we have obviously our survey that we discussed. We have community liaisons that the commission has recruited to help ensure that our outreach is done diversely and culturally appropriately to help us guide that process as well. Our community liaisons are helping identify World Cafe participants to bring together. COVID has changed everything in the world, but one of the things that it's changed is how we gather in community, and so that looks a little bit different than it would in any year but 2020. And also, we'll be doing some interviews with key community organizations as well.
Thanks for that. Pastor Gail, let's take a moment for a couple of questions that maybe have come in online.
I have a couple of them. First of all, this one, we have talked a lot about race. I'd love to know if there is similar emphasis for sexual identity, LGBTQ, and gender non-conforming populations.
Yes, absolutely. So when we talk about human rights and diversity, the assumption is that we talk mostly about race. And while that is sometimes true, it certainly is not always. We do also focus on LGBTQ issues. I know we participate in the Human Rights Campaign's Municipality Equity Index that they do related to that community each year. And we've also done, I know we did an outreach event with our one of our high school groups a few years ago where we gathered a number of young people from that community to speak with some of the elders from that community and do some shared learning, and we viewed a documentary together called Out North. It was a TPT production that was put together. So a lot of what we do is based on race and cultural orientation, but that doesn't always mean the color of folks' skin. We do move beyond that quite often.
And one other question, has the information shared this evening been made available to all Eden Prairie residents?
Yes, with the exception of the Race Equity Initiative, a lot of that isn't publicly published yet because it's still in progress. But one thing that I like to do when I find data is to only find data that you have access to as well. So all of the Met Council data, the city data, all of those surveys I pulled directly from the public web. For one, that's how I keep my thoughts organized, but also to make sure that it's available for others. And I do have one more slide here at the end. Well, it didn't make the cut, but a list of all of the slides had the different organizations listed. So if you're looking for data about the city, Met Council and census data is the most reliable. And if you're looking for information about the city's website.
Is this presentation also meant we put it on our website as well for people to follow up on?
Absolutely.
If they were interested?
And my
Thank you.
email is at the end, and my phone number as well. So if folks have questions about a particular slide, they're always welcome to reach out.
Okay, thank you.
That's it.
Okay. Any other questions from those in the audience here? As we've heard a lot about the city of Eden Prairie, about our neighborhoods. We've heard a lot about the enthusiasm, but also the rub underneath and desire to move forward in a new and a committed and a different way and to listen. So I for one, am very curious to hear how the results come back here in June and July when the initiative reaches that point where the results are shared with the council, and then what does that mean? I mean, that's the big question for all of us. But consider us here at St. Andrew as people that are keenly interested in how that study will help shape and reshape us as we look into 2021 and beyond. We're very, very, very interested and concerned because we want to make things work for all of our neighbors. So.
Absolutely.
Okay. So thanks for being here. Thanks for joining us online. This will be also on our YouTube page as well for viewing later too. It's recorded and is there, and the presentation, as I mentioned, that they've put together will also be available on the website. So Megan, thanks for being here. Also great to have you as well, and we're just pleased for the evening with you. So let me offer a quick prayer before we break for the evening. Gracious God, we give thanks for leadership and for our community. Unite us together in a sense of newness and a sense of justice and a sense of caring for our neighbor. What might we do differently in the future that will help everyone feel more welcomed and engaged in our culture and community? Lead us, bless us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So Greg, thank you. And also thank you so much for being here, Megan. Have a good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Pastor. Appreciate it.
Yep.